You two probably saved their lives by getting them out of that car when you did, Steve told them as his team prepared Rebecca for transport. The engine was starting to smoke when we passed the wreck site. Another few minutes and things could have been much worse. As they loaded Rebecca onto a stretcher, she began to stir slightly. Her eyes fluttered open for just a moment, and she seemed to focus on Grace's face hovering above her. "The baby," Rebecca whispered weakly, her voice barely audible over the rain still pounding outside. "Please, protect the baby." "He's safe," Grace assured her, gently squeezing Rebecca's hand. "We have him, and is completely fine. You just focus on getting better." Rebecca's eyes found Hope, who was still holding Thomas in her arms. A single tear rolled down the injured woman's cheek, and she mouthed the words "thank you" before losing consciousness again. The paramedics quickly loaded Rebecca into the ambulance, and Steve turned back to the sisters. "What about the baby? Do you know if he has any family we should contact?" Grace and Hope looked at each other, then at little Thomas, who had fallen asleep in Hope's arms despite all the commotion. They had searched Rebecca's purse and found only a few personal items and some cash, but no identification for the baby or any emergency contacts. "We'll bring him to the hospital with us," Grace said without hesitation. "Someone needs to stay with him until his family can be found." As they gathered up the diaper bag and baby carrier, neither sister could have imagined that their simple act of kindness would change all of their lives forever. They had no way of knowing that baby Thomas Morrison was the heir to a billion-dollar fortune, or that his mysterious circumstances would soon bring both danger and unexpected blessings into their world. The storm continued to rage outside as they prepared to follow the ambulance to the hospital, but inside their hearts, both Grace and Hope felt a strange sense of peace. They had done the right thing, and somehow they knew that everything was going to work out exactly as it was meant to. The emergency room at Austin Memorial Hospital buzzed with activity as Grace and Hope arrived with baby Thomas. The storm had caused multiple accidents throughout the city, and the normally organized ER felt chaotic and overwhelming. Nurses rushed between curtained areas while doctors shouted orders over the constant din of medical equipment and worried family members. Grace approached the registration desk, still holding the diaper bag they had retrieved from Rebecca's car. The clerk, a tired-looking woman named Patricia, barely glanced up from her computer screen as she processed the paperwork for Rebecca Walsh. "We're here with the baby from the car accident," Grace explained. "The woman who was driving, Rebecca Walsh, she's being treated now. We're the ones who found them and brought the baby here." Patricia looked up with surprise, taking in the sight of Hope gently bouncing Thomas in her arms while he goggled contentedly. "Are you family members?" "No, we're just the people who helped them," Hope replied. "But there was no identification for the baby in the car, and Rebecca asked us to protect him before she lost consciousness again." The clerk seemed unsure how to handle this unusual situation. She made several phone calls and finally directed them to a small waiting area near the pediatric section. A social worker would need to be called to determine temporary custody arrangements for Thomas until his family could be located. Dr. Sarah Chen, a pediatrician who had been working at the hospital for over 15 years, came to examine Thomas within the hour. She was a small, efficient woman with kind eyes who immediately put the sisters at ease with her gentle manner. "You two did an excellent job getting him out of that situation," Dr. Chen told them after completing a thorough examination. "He's completely healthy and shows no signs of trauma from the accident. Someone clearly took very good care of this little one." Thomas had charmed every nurse and doctor who came near him. His bright blue eyes and ready smile seemed to lift the spirits of everyone in the normally somber emergency department. Even Patricia from registration had come by twice just to see how he was doing. "Have you been able to find any information about his family?" Grace asked Dr. Chen as they waited for the social worker to arrive. "The police are running the license plate from the car, but it's registered to a rental company. Rebecca Walsh's identification shows an address in Dallas, but when they called, the landlord said she moved out 3 weeks ago with no forwarding address." Hope looked down at Thomas, who had grabbed onto her finger and was holding on tightly. "That's strange. Why would someone be driving a rental car with a baby and no emergency contacts?" Before Dr. Chen could respond, a commotion erupted near the main entrance. A well-dressed man in his 30s was arguing loudly with security guards, demanding to know about patients from car accidents. Grace caught only fragments of his words, but she heard him mention something about a missing baby. "I wonder if that's related to Thomas," Grace murmured to her sister. The social worker, Janet Coleman, arrived an hour later. She was a compassionate woman in her 50s who had seen every possible family situation during her 20-year career. After interviewing the sisters and reviewing the circumstances, she faced a difficult decision. "Normally, we would place the baby in our emergency foster care system until family can be located," Janet explained. "But our system is completely overwhelmed right now. The storm has displaced dozens of families, and we simply don't have any available placements." Grace felt a knot forming in her stomach. The thought of Thomas being placed with strangers when he had already been through so much trauma felt wrong. "What other options are there?" "Well," Janet said slowly, "given that you two are nursing students with clean background checks, and considering the extraordinary circumstances, I could approve a temporary emergency placement with you. It would only be until we can locate his family, probably just a few days." Hope and Grace looked at each other, communicating in that silent way that only twins can manage. They both knew their tiny apartment was barely suitable for 2 college students, let alone a baby. Their finances were already stretched thin between tuition and living expenses. But looking down at Thomas, who was now sleeping peacefully in Hope's arms, neither of them could bear the thought of abandoning him. "We'll do it," Grace said firmly. "Whatever he needs, we'll figure it out." Janet smiled, clearly moved by their selfless decision. "I'll start the paperwork immediately. You'll need some basic supplies, but I can provide vouchers for formula, diapers, and a few other essentials." As if the universe was responding to their commitment, help began arriving from unexpected sources. Dr. Chen returned with a bag of baby supplies that had been donated to the hospital. Several nurses had pooled their money to buy Thomas some clothes and toys. Even Patricia from registration stopped by with a small teddy bear she had purchased in the gift shop. "This baby has touched a lot of hearts today," Dr. Chen observed as she watched the parade of hospital staff dropping off items. "I've never seen anything quite like it." The most surprising assistance came from Mrs. Rodriguez, an elderly woman whose grandson had been treated for a minor injury earlier that day. She had overheard the sisters talking about their situation and approached them with tears in her eyes. "My daughter lives in your apartment complex," Mrs. Rodriguez explained in accented English. "She told me about what you girls did tonight, saving that woman and baby. I raised 8 children, and I have a crib and baby furniture in my garage that my grandchildren have outgrown. Please, let me help." Grace was overwhelmed by the generosity of complete strangers. "We couldn't possibly accept all of that. It's too much." "Mija, when people do good things, God sends good things back to them," Mrs. Rodriguez said with a warm smile. "You saved a life tonight. Let people help you save another one." As the evening progressed, Rebecca Walsh remained unconscious but stable in the intensive care unit. The doctors were optimistic about her recovery, but she had suffered a serious concussion and several broken ribs. It would be at least a few days before she would be able to provide any information about Thomas or his family. Detective Mark Thompson arrived around midnight to interview the sisters about the accident. He was a veteran investigator with a reputation for thoroughness, but even he seemed touched by their story. "I've seen a lot of accidents in my career, but not many where strangers go this far to help," Detective Thompson told them. "The rental car has been processed, but we didn't find much useful information." Rebecca Walsh paid cash for a one-day rental, which is unusual. She had very little with her besides the baby and some basic supplies. "It almost sounds like she was running from something," Hope observed. Detective Thompson nodded grimly. "That's occurred to us as well. We're checking with law enforcement in other states to see if there are any missing person reports that might match." By 2 in the morning, the paperwork was complete and the sisters were free to take Thomas home. A small crowd of hospital staff gathered to see them off, and several people pressed their phone numbers into Grace's hands with offers to help with babysitting or anything else they might need. "You call me if you need anything at all," Dr. Chen insisted as she hugged both sisters goodbye. "And bring him back in a week for a follow-up appointment. I want to make sure he's adjusting well." As they waited for their taxi in the hospital lobby, Grace reflected on how dramatically their lives had changed in just a few hours. This morning, their biggest worry had been passing their nursing finals. Now they were responsible for a baby whose very existence seemed to be shrouded in mystery. Thomas woke up as they were getting into the taxi and looked around with those remarkable blue eyes. When he saw Hope's face, he smiled and reached up to touch her cheek with his tiny hand. It was as if he understood that these two young women had become his protectors and guardians. "We're going to take good care of you," Grace whispered to him as the taxi pulled away from the hospital. "Whatever brought you into our lives, we're going to make sure you're safe and loved." Neither sister could have predicted that within 24 hours, their small act of kindness would attract the attention of one of the wealthiest men in Texas, or that their temporary commitment to help a baby in need would become the foundation for a completely new kind of family built on love, generosity, and second chances. The next morning arrived far too soon for Grace and Hope, who had managed only a few hours of sleep between Thomas's feeding schedule and their worry about Rebecca Walsh's condition. Sunlight streamed through their small apartment windows, illuminating the chaos of baby supplies that had somehow accumulated overnight. Mrs. Rodriguez had been true to her word. By 7 a.m., her son and two nephews had delivered a beautiful white crib, a changing table, a high chair, and boxes of baby clothes in various sizes. Their tiny living room now looked like a baby furniture showroom, but somehow it felt exactly right. "I cannot believe how much our lives have changed in 12 hours, Hope said as she prepared another bottle for Thomas. He sat contentedly in a borrowed bouncer seat, watching her every move with those intelligent blue eyes. Grace was on the phone with the hospital, checking on Rebecca's condition. The news was encouraging. Rebecca had regained consciousness during the night and was asking about the baby. Her doctors expected a full recovery, though she would need several weeks of rest and rehabilitation. "She wants to see us," Grace announced after hanging up. "The doctors said she's been asking about Thomas constantly since she woke up." They gathered up Thomas and his supplies for another trip to the hospital. The nursing staff greeted them like returning family members, and several people stopped by just to see how the baby was adjusting to his temporary home. Rebecca Walsh looked much better than she had the night before. The color had returned to her face, and though she still had bandages covering her head wound, her eyes were clear and alert. When she saw Thomas in Hope's arms, she began crying tears of relief. "I was so afraid something had happened to him," Rebecca said, her voice still weak but filled with emotion. "You two saved both our lives last night. I can never repay what you did for us." Grace pulled a chair closer to Rebecca's bed. "We're just glad you're both okay. But we need to ask you some questions about Thomas. The social workers and police need to contact his family." Rebecca's expression immediately changed, and she looked around the room nervously as if checking to see who might be listening. "It's complicated. Thomas's situation is not what it appears to be." "What do you mean?" Hope asked gently, adjusting Thomas in her arms as he began to fuss slightly. "I'm his nanny, but not in the traditional sense," Rebecca began slowly. "His father hired me 6 months ago to help care for him, but 3 days ago I had to take Thomas and run. There are people who want to hurt him, and I was trying to get him somewhere safe when the accident happened." Grace felt a chill run down her spine. What kind of people? Why would anyone want to hurt a baby? Rebecca glanced around again, then motioned for them to come closer. "Thomas's father is William Morrison. He owns Morrison Technologies, one of the largest software companies in the country. He's worth billions of dollars." Hope nearly dropped the bottle she was holding. "The William Morrison? The one who's always in the business magazines?" "Yes, and Thomas's mother tried to kidnap him last week. She's been in and out of rehabilitation centers for drug addiction, and when the courts awarded full custody to William, she became desperate. She hired some very dangerous people to help her take Thomas back." The pieces were starting to come together for Grace. "So you were protecting him by running away." William didn't know who to trust. Some of his own security team might have been compromised. He asked me to take Thomas somewhere safe until he could figure out who was behind the threat. I was driving to a safe house in San Antonio when the storm hit. Rebecca struggled to sit up straighter in her hospital bed. "You have to understand, William Morrison is a good man. He loves his son more than anything in the world. When his wife died in childbirth, he was devastated. He's been raising Thomas alone with help from nannies, but he's very hands-on. The problem is that his ex-wife, Christine, has never accepted that their marriage ended." "Wait," Hope interrupted. I thought you said Thomas's mother died in childbirth. I'm sorry, I should have been clearer. Christine is William's ex-wife from a previous marriage. They divorced 3 years ago, but she became obsessed with the idea of having a child with him. When William married Sarah and they had Thomas, Christine completely lost her grip on reality. After Sarah died, Christine convinced herself that she should be the one raising Thomas. Grace was struggling to process all of this information. So you're saying this baby is being hunted by his father's ex-wife? Not just her. She has money and connections to some very unsavory people. William has been working with the FBI to track down the threats, but in the meantime, Thomas needed to be protected. Janet Coleman, the social worker, arrived for her scheduled check-in and was surprised to find Rebecca awake and talking. After Rebecca repeated her story, Janet made several phone calls to verify the information. I've spoken with the FBI office in Dallas, and they confirmed that there is an active investigation involving the Morrison family, Janet reported. They are sending an agent here to interview everyone involved. Within hours, FBI Special Agent Lisa Parker arrived at the hospital. She was a no-nonsense woman in her 40s who had spent years working cases involving wealthy families and corporate espionage. After interviewing Rebecca privately, she spoke with the sisters about their role in the situation. What you two did last night probably saved both Rebecca and Thomas from a much worse fate, Agent Parker told them. We've been tracking Christine Morrison's movements, and we believe she had people following Rebecca when she left Dallas. Does that mean we're in danger too? Hope asked, unconsciously holding Thomas a little tighter. We don't believe so. The fact that you rescued them randomly during a storm means there's no way Christine's people could have predicted this outcome. You're probably safer than anyone else right now because you're completely off their radar. Agent Parker had more surprising news. William Morrison is flying here this afternoon. He's been out of his mind with worry since Rebecca and Thomas disappeared. When we told him what happened and how you've been caring for his son, he insisted on coming to thank you personally. The sisters spent the rest of the day preparing for what felt like the most important meeting of their lives. Mrs. Rodriguez and several neighbors had continued bringing supplies and offers of help. Their apartment now looked like a proper nursery, complete with everything a baby could need. Thomas seemed blissfully unaware of all the drama surrounding his life. He had settled into a comfortable routine with his temporary caregivers, taking his bottles on schedule and sleeping peacefully in his new crib. He seemed particularly attached to Hope, reaching for her whenever she was near, and crying when she left the room. He's gotten used to us already, Grace observed as she watched Hope sing softly to Thomas while changing his diaper. It's going to be hard to give him up. I know, Hope replied quietly. I keep trying to remind myself that this is temporary, but it's difficult not to get attached. He's such a sweet baby. Detective Thompson stopped by their apartment that evening with an update on the investigation. Rebecca's car accident was just that, an accident. The storm caused dozens of crashes that night. But the timing might have actually been fortunate. Our sources indicate that Christine Morrison's people had tracked Rebecca to Austin and were planning to intercept her before she reached San Antonio. So if the accident hadn't happened, they might have caught her anyway. Grace asked. It's possible. But now Thomas is safe with you, and we know exactly where he is. Christine Morrison has no idea what happened to them, which gives us a significant advantage. As evening approached, Grace and Hope tried to process everything they had learned. What had started as a simple rescue during a storm had become something much more complex and significant. They were now protecting the heir to a business empire from a dangerous woman with unlimited resources and questionable mental stability. But looking at Thomas, who was currently napping peacefully in his crib while clutching the teddy bear from the hospital gift shop, none of the complications seemed to matter. He was an innocent child who needed protection and love, and they were determined to provide both for as long as necessary. Whatever happens tomorrow when his father arrives, Hope said as she gently adjusted Thomas's blanket, I want him to know that we'll do whatever is best for Thomas, even if that means saying goodbye. Grace nodded, though her heart was already breaking at the thought. In less than 24 hours, this beautiful baby had become the center of their world. But they had always known this arrangement was temporary, and tomorrow would bring the reality of returning Thomas to his real family. Neither sister could have imagined that William Morrison would arrive with an offer that would change all of their lives in ways they never could have dreamed possible. The next 3 days passed in a blur of bottles, diaper changes, and sleepless nights, but Grace and Hope had never felt more fulfilled. Thomas had settled into their small apartment as if he belonged there, and the sisters had adapted to their new roles as temporary parents with surprising ease. Their neighbors in the modest apartment complex had rallied around them in ways that restored their faith in human kindness. Mrs. Patterson from downstairs brought homemade baby food and offered to babysit whenever they needed to attend classes. The college students next door took turns doing their laundry so they could focus on Thomas. Even their grumpy landlord, Mr. Murphy, had stopped by with a gift card to the grocery store and a gruff comment about good people deserving good things. Grace had managed to reschedule her nursing final exams after explaining the situation to her professors. Most of them had been understanding and impressed by her decision to help a child in need. Professor Williams, who taught their pediatric nursing course, had even offered to provide extra tutoring to help Grace catch up on the material she had missed. Hope had taken a temporary leave from her part-time job at the campus bookstore, but her supervisor had assured her that the position would be waiting when she was ready to return. In the meantime, several of their classmates had organized a fund to help cover their expenses while they cared for Thomas. "I keep expecting to wake up and find out this has all been a dream," Hope said as she fed Thomas his morning bottle. He had grown even more attached to her over the past few days, and he would often fuss when other people tried to hold him. Grace was studying her nursing notes while simultaneously doing laundry and preparing Thomas's next bottle. She had become incredibly efficient at multitasking since the baby arrived. "I know what you mean. A week ago, our biggest worry was paying next month's rent. Now we're responsible for someone else's entire future." Rebecca Walsh had been released from the hospital the previous day and had insisted on staying in a nearby hotel so she could help with Thomas's care. She was still recovering from her injuries, but she felt responsible for the sisters' situation and wanted to do whatever she could to assist them. "You two have given up so much to help us," Rebecca had said when she arrived at their apartment with groceries and additional baby supplies. "I want you to know that what you're doing is extraordinary." Most people would have handed Thomas over to social services and moved on with their lives. The sisters had learned more about Thomas's background from Rebecca over the past few days. His father, William Morrison, had been devastated by the loss of his wife Sarah during childbirth. He had thrown himself into his work while trying to be the best single father possible, but the constant threats from his ex-wife Christine had made normal life impossible. "William is a wonderful father," Rebecca explained as she watched Hope play peekaboo with Thomas. "He reads to Thomas every night, even when he's traveling for business. He calls it their video chat bedtime stories. He's been going crazy not being able to see his son." Agent Parker had called daily with updates on the investigation. Christine Morrison had been spotted in several states over the past week, apparently searching for any trace of Rebecca and Thomas. The FBI was working to build a case against her for kidnapping conspiracy, but they needed more evidence before they could make an arrest. "The good news is that she has no idea where Thomas is right now," Agent Parker had assured them during her last visit. "You're providing the safest possible environment for him while we work to resolve this situation." William Morrison had been delayed in Austin due to business emergencies, but he called the sisters twice daily to check on his son. Grace had been surprised by how normal and down-to-earth he sounded during their conversations. She had expected a billionaire to be aloof or demanding, but William was simply a worried father who was grateful for their help. "How is he eating?" William would ask during each call. "Is he sleeping through the night? Does he seem happy?" The concern in his voice was unmistakable, and it was clear that his wealth meant nothing compared to his love for his son. Thomas himself seemed to thrive in the chaotic but loving environment of the sisters' apartment. He had started sleeping for longer stretches at night, which allowed Grace and Hope to get more rest. During the day, he was alert and playful, responding to their voices and smiling whenever they picked him up. "He's such a good baby," Hope observed as she carried him around the apartment, showing him different objects and talking to him about everything she saw. "I can't imagine anyone wanting to hurt something so innocent and sweet." Dr. Chen had stopped by for Thomas's follow-up appointment and had been amazed by how well he was developing. "Babies are incredibly resilient, but they also need stability and love to truly thrive. You two are providing both, and it shows in his development." The pediatrician had also noticed the strong bond that was forming between Thomas and his temporary caregivers. He's clearly attached to both of you, but especially to Hope. That's actually wonderful for his emotional development. Babies need consistent, loving relationships to feel secure. As the week progressed, Grace found herself thinking more and more about what would happen when William Morrison finally arrived to reclaim his son. She understood that Thomas belonged with his father, and she genuinely wanted what was best for the baby. But the thought of saying goodbye was becoming more difficult each day. Hope seemed to be struggling with the same feelings. She had started talking to Thomas about his daddy during their daily routines, as if preparing both herself and the baby for the eventual separation. "Your daddy loves you so much," she would whisper during his bottle feedings. "He's coming to take you home soon, and you're going to have such a wonderful life with him." Their apartment had been transformed into a baby-friendly environment. The dangerous corners had been padded, electrical outlets covered, and breakable items moved to higher shelves. Mrs. Rodriguez had provided a baby gate to block access to the kitchen, and several neighbors had contributed toys and books appropriate for Thomas's age. "This place looks like a real nursery now," Grace commented as she organized the growing collection of baby clothes that continued to arrive from well-meaning neighbors and friends. "Thomas has more outfits than I do." The sisters had also developed efficient routines for Thomas's care that allowed them to continue their studies and maintain some semblance of their normal lives. They took turns with night feedings, shared diaper duty equally, and had created a schedule that ensured Thomas always had constant attention and supervision. Rebecca had been impressed by their organization and dedication. "You two are natural mothers," she told them one afternoon as she watched Grace efficiently change Thomas while simultaneously quizzing Hope on nursing terminology. "I've worked with a lot of families over the years, and I've never seen anyone adapt to parenthood as quickly and successfully as you have." The comment had touched both sisters deeply, though it also highlighted the temporary nature of their situation. They were playing house with someone else's child, and no matter how attached they became, they would eventually have to return to their regular lives. "I keep trying to memorize everything about him," Hope admitted to Grace one evening as they watched Thomas sleep in his crib. "The way he smells after his bath, the little sounds he makes when he's content, the way his whole face lights up when he smiles. I want to remember all of it." Grace understood exactly what her sister meant. Every moment with Thomas felt precious and fleeting. They were creating memories that would last a lifetime, even if their time as his caregivers was measured in days rather than years. Neither sister could have predicted that when William Morrison finally arrived the next day, he would bring with him an offer that would allow them to continue being part of Thomas's life in ways they had never imagined possible. The black SUV pulled up outside their apartment building at exactly 10 a.m., and Grace felt her heart skip a beat as she watched from the window. After a week of phone conversations, she was finally going to meet the man whose son had become the center of their world. William Morrison stepped out of the vehicle, and Grace was surprised by how normal he looked. She had expected someone more imposing, perhaps wearing an expensive suit and surrounded by bodyguards. Instead, William Morrison appeared to be a man in his early 30s wearing jeans and a simple blue button-down shirt. He was tall with dark hair and kind eyes, and he moved with the urgent energy of a father who had been separated from his child for too long. "Is he?" Grace called to Hope, who was in the nursery changing Thomas's diaper. They had spent the morning preparing for this meeting, cleaning the apartment and making sure Thomas looked his best in a tiny blue outfit that Mrs. Rodriguez had brought over the day before. A gentle knock came at the door, and Grace took a deep breath before opening it. Standing in the hallway was William Morrison, holding a large bouquet of flowers and looking more nervous than she would have expected from a billionaire businessman. "Grace, I'm William Morrison. Thank you so much for everything you've done for my son." His voice was warm and genuine, with none of the arrogance she might have anticipated from someone of his wealth and status. "Please, come in," Grace replied, accepting the flowers with a smile. "Thomas is doing wonderfully. Hope is just finishing getting him ready to see you." William stepped into their small apartment and looked around with obvious emotion. The living room had been completely transformed into a baby-friendly space, with toys scattered across the floor and a high chair positioned near the kitchen table. Photos of Thomas that the sisters had taken over the past week were displayed on their refrigerator alongside grocery lists and nursing school schedules. "You've created a real home for him here," William said softly, his eyes taking in every detail. "I can see how much love you've put into caring for him." Hope emerged from the nursery carrying Thomas, who was wide awake and alert. When he saw the stranger, Thomas studied William's face with those intelligent blue eyes, but didn't seem frightened or upset. Hope approached slowly, giving the baby time to adjust to his father's presence. "Thomas, this is your daddy," Hope said gently, her voice catching slightly on the words. "He's been waiting to see you." William's eyes filled with tears as he reached out to take his son. The moment Thomas was in his father's arms, something magical happened. The baby smiled broadly and reached up to touch William's face, as if recognizing him on some instinctive level. "I've missed you so much, little man," William whispered, holding Thomas close and breathing in that distinctive baby scent. "Daddy's here now, and everything's going to be okay." Grace and Hope watched the reunion with mixed emotions. It was beautiful to see father and son together again, but it also made the reality of their situation painfully clear. Thomas belonged with his father, and their time as his caregivers was coming to an end. Rebecca arrived a few minutes later, and William's relief at seeing her safe and recovered was obvious. He thanked her repeatedly for protecting Thomas and for making the difficult decision to trust the sisters with his care. "These two women are angels," Rebecca told William as they all sat in the living room watching Thomas play with a soft toy. "They've sacrificed everything to take care of Thomas, and they've done it without expecting anything in return." William turned to Grace and Hope with an expression of deep gratitude. "I want you to know that what you've done goes far beyond simple kindness. You've given my son love and stability during one of the most dangerous periods of his life. I will never be able to repay that debt." "We don't want repayment," Hope said quietly. "We just wanted to make sure Thomas was safe and loved. He's an amazing baby." "Yes, he is," William agreed, bouncing Thomas gently on his knee. "And from what I can see, he's formed strong attachments to both of you. That's wonderful for his development, but it also creates a difficult situation." Grace wasn't sure what he meant by that, but before she could ask, Agent Parker arrived with Michael Torres, a private investigator who had been working with the FBI on the case. Michael Torres was a man in his 30s with kind eyes and an easy smile. He had spent years working corporate security before becoming a private investigator, and he specialized in cases involving family disputes and missing persons. "We have some significant developments in the case against Christine Morrison," Agent Parker announced as they gathered around the kitchen table. "But we also have some concerns about Thomas's long-term safety." William's expression became serious as he continued to hold his son. "What kind of concerns?" "Christine has been working with a group of criminals who specialize in kidnapping for ransom," Michael explained. "Even if we arrest her, there's no guarantee that her associates won't continue to target Thomas. Your wealth makes him a perpetual target." "So what are you suggesting?" Grace asked, though she was afraid she already knew the answer. "We think Thomas needs to remain in protective custody until we can completely dismantle Christine's network," Agent Parker said. "That could take several months, possibly longer." William looked devastated at the thought of being separated from his son again. "There has to be another solution. I can hire private security, increase protection around our home." "Your estate is too well known," Michael pointed out. "Christine's people know where you live and how to find you. Thomas is safer here with Grace and Hope because nobody knows about this location." The room fell silent as everyone processed this information. Grace felt a strange mixture of relief and anxiety. The thought of keeping Thomas longer was wonderful, but the danger surrounding him was terrifying. "I won't ask you to continue putting yourselves at risk," William said, looking at the sisters with obvious reluctance. "You've already done more than anyone could have expected." "We'll do it," Hope said immediately, surprising everyone including Grace. "If Thomas is safer here, then this is where he should stay." Grace nodded in agreement, though her practical mind was already calculating the challenges they would face. "But we'll need help. We're still students, and we have financial obligations." "That's not a problem," William said firmly. "I'll cover all of your expenses, your tuition, and provide a generous stipend for Thomas's care. Money is not an issue." Michael Torres had been studying the apartment layout and neighborhood. "This location actually works well for security purposes. The building has limited access points, and the neighborhood is stable with observant residents. We can provide additional protection without being obvious about it. Over the next several hours, they worked out the details of an arrangement that would allow Thomas to remain with Grace and Hope while ensuring his safety. William would visit regularly, but would vary his schedule and routes to avoid establishing predictable patterns. Rebecca would continue to assist with Thomas's care, and would serve as an additional layer of protection. "I want to be very clear about something," William said as they finalized the arrangements. "This is not just about protection anymore. Thomas has bonded with you too, and you've clearly bonded with him. If you're willing to continue caring for him, I want this to be a permanent arrangement." Grace and Hope looked at each other in shock. "What do you mean by permanent?" Grace asked. "I mean I want you to become part of Thomas's family. When this danger is over, I hope you'll consider moving to my estate and helping me raise him. He's going to need stability and love, and you've already proven you can provide both." The offer was overwhelming and wonderful and terrifying all at the same time. Grace and Hope had grown to love Thomas deeply, but they had never imagined that their temporary commitment might become a lifelong role. "You don't have to decide anything right now," William continued. "But I want you to know that you'll always have a place in Thomas's life if you want it. He's lucky to have people who care about him as much as you do." As the day progressed and the various officials departed, Grace and Hope found themselves alone with William and Thomas. The baby seemed perfectly content to move between his father and his temporary caregivers, as if sensing that they were all part of his extended family. "He's grown so much just in the past week," William observed as he watched Thomas attempting to grab his own feet. "I can see the love and attention you've given him in everything he does." Neither sister could have imagined that this arrangement would lead to even greater changes in their lives, or that within a few months, their little family would grow in ways that would surprise them all. 3 weeks into their new arrangement, life had settled into a comfortable rhythm that felt surprisingly natural. William visited Thomas every few days, usually staying for several hours to help with feedings and playtime. During these visits, Grace found herself looking forward to his arrival almost as much as Thomas did. William had proven to be nothing like the stereotypical billionaire she had imagined. He was down-to-earth, funny, and completely devoted to his son. He helped with diaper changes without complaint, read stories in silly voices that made Thomas giggle, and often stayed late into the evening just to spend more time with his child. "You're really good at this," Grace observed one evening as she watched William give Thomas his bath. The baby splashed happily in the small tub, while his father made exaggerated surprised faces at each splash. "I had to learn quickly when Sarah died," William replied, his voice becoming slightly sad at the mention of his late wife. "The first few months were terrifying. I had no idea what I was doing, and Thomas seemed so fragile and helpless." Grace had learned more about William's story over the past few weeks. His marriage to Sarah had been a true love story that ended tragically when complications during childbirth took her life. William had been left to raise Thomas alone while dealing with his own grief and the pressures of running a multinational corporation. "Sarah would have loved you too," William said as he carefully lifted Thomas from the tub and wrapped him in a soft towel. "She always said that the most important thing was surrounding Thomas with people who genuinely cared about him, not just people who were paid to care for him." Hope had been spending more time with Michael Torres, who stopped by regularly to check on their security situation. What had started as professional visits had evolved into something more personal, and Grace could see the growing attraction between her sister and the kind-hearted investigator. "Michael is taking me to dinner tomorrow night," Hope announced one afternoon as she folded Thomas's laundry. "He says he wants to discuss the case somewhere away from work, but I think it might be an actual date." Grace smiled at her sister's obvious happiness. "You deserve someone nice. And Michael seems like a genuinely good guy." "He is," Hope agreed. "He's been so patient with all of this craziness, and is wonderful with Thomas. Did you see how excited Thomas got when Michael taught him to play peekaboo yesterday?" The apartment had continued to receive generous donations from neighbors and friends who had been touched by their story. Mrs. Rodriguez had organized a baby shower of sorts, inviting women from throughout the building to contribute items that Thomas might need as he grew. The result was an abundance of toys, clothes, and equipment that would last for months. "You girls have brought this whole community together," Mrs. Rodriguez observed as she delivered another casserole for their dinner. People who never spoke to each other before are now working together to help with the baby. It's beautiful to see. Rebecca had become like an older sister to Grace and Hope, offering advice on childcare and sharing stories about her experiences working with different families. She had decided to stay in Austin permanently, finding work with a local family who appreciated her experience and references from William. "I feel like I found my calling helping you with Thomas," Rebecca told them one day as she watched Grace successfully get the baby to eat his vegetables. "Some situations happen for a reason, and I think this is one of them." Dr. Chen had become a regular visitor as well, stopping by weekly to check on Thomas's development and to marvel at how well he was thriving in their care. "This baby is exceptionally well adjusted," she told William during one of his visits. "He's confident, happy, and developing beautifully. Whatever you're all doing, keep doing it." The investigation into Christine Morrison had made significant progress. Agent Parker reported that they had arrested several members of the criminal organization that Christine had been working with, and they were building a strong case against her for conspiracy and attempted kidnapping. "We expect to make the arrest within the next few weeks," Agent Parker told them during her latest update. Once Christine is in custody and her associates are neutralized, Thomas should be able to return to a normal life. But what constituted a normal life had become an increasingly complex question. Thomas had been with Grace and Hope for over a month now, and he clearly considered them to be his primary caregivers. While he was always excited to see his father, he looked to the sisters for comfort when he was upset and reached for them when he needed reassurance. "I've been thinking about what happens after Christine is arrested," William said one evening as they all sat in the living room watching Thomas play on his blanket. "I don't want to disrupt Thomas's life any more than necessary." Grace had been wondering about the same thing. The thought of giving up Thomas was heartbreaking, but she also understood that he belonged with his father. "What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking that this arrangement has worked so well that maybe we should make it permanent," William said carefully. "Not just the security arrangement, but the family arrangement." Hope looked up from the book she was reading to Thomas. "What do you mean?" "I mean I want you both to come live at my estate and help me raise Thomas. Not as employees, but as family. He needs stability and love, and you've already proven you can provide both." The offer was tempting but also overwhelming. Grace and Hope had grown to love Thomas deeply, but they also had their own lives and dreams to consider. They were still in nursing school with plans for their own careers and futures. "We appreciate the offer," Grace said slowly, "but we need to think about what that would mean for our own goals and plans." "I understand," William replied. "And I want you to know that I would support whatever dreams you have. If you want to finish nursing school, I'll make sure that happens. If you want to work in your field, we'll figure out how to make that work with Thomas's needs." The conversation was interrupted by Michael Torres arriving for his date with Hope. Grace was amused to see how nervous both Hope and Michael seemed as they prepared to leave for dinner. It was clear that what had started as a professional relationship had developed into something much deeper. "We won't be late," Hope promised as she kissed Thomas goodbye. "Call if you need anything at all." After Hope and Michael left, Grace found herself alone with William and Thomas for the first time. The baby was getting sleepy, and William took over the bedtime routine with the practiced ease of an experienced father. "You're really good with him," Grace said as she watched William read a bedtime story with different voices for each character. "I had to learn fast," William replied. "But I have to admit, it's been easier with you and Hope helping. Thomas is so much happier now than he was before." As they put Thomas down for the night, Grace felt a strange sense of contentment. This felt like a real family, even though it had formed under the most unusual circumstances. William was kind, funny, and devoted to his son. Thomas was thriving with the love and attention he was receiving from multiple caregivers. And Grace was discovering feelings for William that went far beyond their shared concern for the baby. "Grace," William said softly as they stood in the doorway watching Thomas sleep, "I want you to know that my offer isn't just about Thomas. I've grown very fond of both you and Hope, but especially you. What we've built here feels like something worth preserving." Grace felt her heart skip a beat at his words. She had been developing feelings for William as well, but she had tried to convince herself that it was just gratitude or proximity. Hearing him express similar feelings made her realize that what was growing between them was real and significant. I feel the same way, she admitted quietly. But this situation is so complicated. I don't want to confuse my feelings for Thomas with my feelings for you. I don't think you are, William said, turning to face her fully. I think what we're feeling is separate from Thomas, even though he brought us together. I think we're falling in love with each other, not just with the situation. The conversation was interrupted by Hope and Michael returning from their date, both of them glowing with happiness. It was clear that the evening had gone very well, and Grace could see that her sister was genuinely smitten with the kind investigator. How did it go? Grace asked as Hope helped her clean up the living room. It was wonderful, Hope said with a dreamy smile. Michael is everything I could have hoped for in a man. He's kind, intelligent, funny, and he seems to genuinely care about what happens to all of us. As the evening wound down and everyone prepared to leave, Grace realized that their little group was becoming something much more than a temporary childcare arrangement. They were becoming a family in the truest sense of the word, bound together by love, circumstance, and a shared commitment to Thomas's well-being. Neither Grace nor Hope could have predicted that within a few weeks, their unconventional family would face its biggest test yet, and that the resolution would lead to happiness beyond anything they had ever imagined. The phone call came at 6 a.m. on a Tuesday morning, jolting Grace awake from a deep sleep. Agent Parker's voice was urgent but triumphant as she delivered the news they had all been waiting to hear. We got her. Christine Morrison was arrested last night in Houston, trying to board a private plane to Mexico. We have evidence linking her to the kidnapping conspiracy, and her associates have already started talking. Thomas is safe now. Grace sat up in bed, trying to process the information while Thomas stirred in his crib across the room. After 6 weeks of living with the constant threat hanging over them, it was difficult to believe that the danger was finally over. What happens now? Grace asked quietly, not wanting to wake Hope or the baby. William is flying in this morning to discuss the next steps. The immediate threat is over, but there will be legal proceedings and other matters to resolve. He asked me to tell you that he wants to have a family meeting with all of you. By the time William arrived at their apartment 3 hours later, Grace and Hope had managed to process the news and prepare themselves for what they assumed would be a goodbye conversation. Thomas was dressed in his best outfit, and they had packed his belongings in the bags that William had provided weeks earlier. But William's demeanor surprised them. Instead of looking relieved and ready to reclaim his normal life, he seemed nervous and uncertain. He hugged Thomas tightly but kept glancing at Grace and Hope as if trying to read their emotions. I have something important to discuss with all of you, William began as they gathered in the living room. Now that the immediate danger is over, we need to decide what happens next. Grace felt her heart sinking. This was the moment she had been dreading for weeks. We understand that you want to take Thomas home now. We've prepared all of his things, and we'll help with the transition however we can. That's just it, William said, sitting down across from them with Thomas on his lap. I don't want to take Thomas away from this. What we've built here is too important to just abandon. Hope looked confused. What do you mean? I mean that over the past 6 weeks, Thomas has thrived in ways I never imagined possible. He's happy, secure, and loved. He has multiple people caring for him who genuinely adore him. Why would I want to destroy that? William paused, clearly choosing his words carefully. More than that, I've fallen in love with this family we've created. Grace, what I feel for you goes far beyond gratitude. Hope, you've become like a sister to me. And Michael has become one of my closest friends. Grace felt her cheeks flush at his words. She had been developing strong feelings for William as well, but she had assumed that once the crisis was over, he would return to his regular life and forget about them. What are you suggesting? Grace asked softly. I'm suggesting that we make this permanent in every way possible, William replied. Grace, I'm in love with you. I want to marry you and create a real family with Thomas at the center of it. Hope, I want you to be Thomas's aunt and my sister-in-law. Michael, I know you and Hope have developed feelings for each other, and I couldn't be happier about that. The room fell silent as everyone processed William's unexpected proposal. Grace felt overwhelmed by the magnitude of what he was suggesting. Marriage to William would mean not only gaining a husband, but also becoming a mother to Thomas and stepping into a completely different life. William, this is all so sudden, Grace said carefully. 6 weeks ago, We didn't even know each other existed. Are you sure these feelings are real and not just gratitude or circumstance? I've been asking myself the same question for weeks, William admitted. But every day I spend with you makes me more certain that what I feel is real love, not just appreciation for what you've done for Thomas. Thomas chose that moment to reach for Grace, babbling happily as she took him from his father's arms. The baby looked up at her with those bright blue eyes and smiled, and Grace felt her heart melt completely. He loves you, William observed. He's never been this attached to anyone except me. And watching you with him, I can see that you love him just as much. Hope had been uncharacteristically quiet during the conversation, but now she spoke up. What would this mean practically? We're still in nursing school, and you have a business to run. How would we make it work? We'll figure it out together, William said. You can finish your nursing degrees if you want to, or you can choose different paths. The important thing is that we do it as a family. Michael Torres arrived a few minutes later with news about the legal proceedings against Christine Morrison. She's agreed to a plea bargain that includes a lengthy prison sentence and the permanent relinquishment of any claims to Thomas. There will be no more threats from that direction. As Michael shared the details of Christine's arrest and confession, Grace noticed the way he and Hope looked at each other. It was clear that their relationship had deepened significantly over the past few weeks, and they seemed to communicate with just glances and small gestures. Michael, William said after the legal update was complete, I have a proposition for you as well. I'd like you to come work for me permanently as head of family security. The pay would be considerably better than private investigation work, and it would allow you to stay close to Hope and Thomas. Michael looked surprised but pleased by the offer. That's very generous, William. I'd need to think about it, but I have to admit that the idea of leaving this family behind was not appealing to me. Rebecca arrived later that afternoon with a cake to celebrate Christine's arrest and Thomas's safety. I cannot believe how much this little boy has changed all of our lives, she said as she watched Thomas play with his toys on the living room floor. He really has, Grace agreed. 6 weeks ago, Hope and I were just college students worried about paying our bills and passing our exams. Now we're part of something so much bigger and more meaningful. As the afternoon progressed, the conversation turned to practical matters. William's estate in Dallas had plenty of room for everyone, and it would provide Thomas with a stable, secure environment in which to grow up. Grace and Hope could finish their nursing degrees at a university near the estate, and they would have all the resources they needed to succeed. I want to be very clear about something, William said as they discussed the potential arrangements. This isn't about me hiring you to take care of Thomas. This is about us becoming a real family. Grace, if you agree to marry me, it will be because we love each other, not because of convenience or obligation. Grace felt tears welling up in her eyes as she looked around at the group of people who had become so important to her. Thomas was playing contentedly with his toys, completely unaware that his future was being decided. Hope and Michael were holding hands, clearly committed to their own relationship. And William was looking at her with an expression of hope and love that took her breath away. Yes, Grace said suddenly, surprising everyone including herself. Yes, I want to marry you. I want to be Thomas's mother and Hope's sister-in-law and part of this crazy, wonderful family we've created. Hope jumped up and hugged her sister tightly, while William's face lit up with joy. Thomas looked up at all the excitement and clapped his hands, as if he understood that something wonderful was happening. I guess this means we're all moving to Dallas, Hope said with a laugh. I hope you have room for everyone at this estate of yours. I have room for as many people as want to be part of our family, William replied. And I have a feeling this family is going to keep growing. As they celebrated their engagement and their new future together, none of them could have predicted that within a year, their family would indeed grow in the most wonderful way possible, bringing even more love and joy into their already blessed lives. The moving trucks arrived at dawn on a crisp Saturday morning in October, and Grace felt a bittersweet mixture of excitement and nostalgia as she watched their few belongings being loaded for the journey to Dallas. Their small Austin apartment had been the site of so many important moments over the past 2 months, and it was difficult to leave it behind. Are you sure about this? Hope asked as she carried Thomas around the empty living room one last time. Once we get to Dallas, everything changes. We'll be living in a completely different world. Grace looked around at the bare walls where photos of Thomas had hung just hours before. I'm sure Thomas belongs with his father, and I belong with both of them. This feels right. Mrs. Rodriguez and several other neighbors had gathered in the parking lot to see them off. There were teas and hugs as the small community that had rallied around them during the crisis said their goodbyes. Mrs. Rodriguez pressed a package of homemade cookies into Hope's hands and whispered a blessing in Spanish. "You take care of that beautiful baby," Mrs. Rodriguez said as she stroked Thomas's cheek one last time. "And you remember that you always have family here in Austin if you need us." William had arrived early to oversee the move and to drive with them to Dallas. He seemed more nervous than Grace had ever seen him, as if the reality of bringing them to his home was making him second-guess his decisions. "My estate is very different from what you're used to," William warned as they loaded Thomas into his car seat for the journey. "It's much larger and more formal. I want you to feel comfortable there, but I understand if it takes some adjustment." The drive to Dallas took 3 hours, and Grace spent most of the time watching the Texas countryside pass by while Thomas napped peacefully in his car seat. William told them stories about his property and the staff who maintained it, trying to prepare them for what they would find. "I have a housekeeper named Martha who has been with the family for 20 years, William explained. "She's wonderful with children, and she's been looking forward to meeting Thomas. There's also a groundskeeper, a cook, and a few other staff members who help maintain the property." When they finally turned through the gates of the Morrison estate, Grace gasped at the sight that greeted them. The main house was a beautiful colonial-style mansion, surrounded by perfectly manicured gardens and towering oak trees. A circular driveway led to the front entrance, where several people were waiting to welcome them. "It's enormous," Hope whispered as they pulled up to the front door. "Are you sure we belong here?" "You belong wherever Thomas belongs," William said firmly. "And Thomas belongs with all of us." Martha, the housekeeper, was a warm woman in her 50s who immediately took charge of getting everyone settled. She had prepared rooms for Grace and Hope in the family wing of the house, close to the nursery that had been specially designed for Thomas. "Mr. Morrison has been so excited about bringing you all home," Martha told them as she showed them around the house. "He's been planning every detail to make sure you're comfortable here." The nursery was beyond anything Grace could have imagined. It was spacious and bright, with hand-painted murals on the walls and every possible convenience for Thomas's care. But what touched her most was the photo album on the changing table filled with pictures from their time in Austin. "William had copies made of all the photos we took," Grace realized as she flipped through the album. "He wanted Thomas to remember this time in his life." Thomas seemed to take the new environment in stride, exploring his new room with curiosity and delight. The abundance of new toys and the larger space to play clearly excited him, but he stayed close to Grace and Hope throughout the tour. That evening, William organized a small dinner party to introduce Grace and Hope to some of his closest friends and business associates. Grace was nervous about meeting people from William's social circle, worried that they would judge her background or question her sudden appearance in his life. But William's friends turned out to be warm and welcoming. Dr. and Mrs. Peterson, an older couple who had been close friends of William's parents, immediately embraced Grace and Hope as family. James Sullivan, William's business partner, brought gifts for Thomas and spent most of the evening playing with the baby. "William has been a different person since Thomas came into his life," Dr. Peterson told Grace as they watched William feeding the baby his dinner. "But since he started talking about you and Hope, he's been happier than I've seen him since Sarah died." Over the following weeks, Grace and Hope settled into their new life with surprising ease. William had enrolled them in nursing school at a prestigious university in Dallas, and he insisted on covering all of their expenses while they completed their degrees. "Education is important," William told them when Grace expressed concern about the cost. "I want you to have your own careers and accomplishments, not just be dependent on me." Hope had decided to accept Michael Torres's marriage proposal, and they were planning a wedding for the following spring. Michael had taken the position as head of family security and had moved into a guest house on the estate. The 4 adults had become like siblings, sharing responsibilities for Thomas and supporting each other's goals and dreams. "I never imagined I could be this happy," Hope confided to Grace one evening as they gave Thomas his bath. "A year ago, we were struggling to pay rent and worried about our future. Now we have everything we could ever want." Grace understood exactly what her sister meant. Their lives had been completely transformed by their decision to help a stranger and her baby during a storm. The generosity they had shown had been returned to them 100-fold, in ways they never could have predicted. Thomas thrived in his new environment. He had a dedicated play area, a full-time pediatrician on call, and more toys and activities than any child could need. But most importantly, he had 4 adults who adored him and were committed to his happiness and development. "He's such a lucky little boy," Rebecca observed during one of her regular visits. She had remained in Austin, but came to Dallas frequently to see Thomas and help with his care. Not many children get to grow up with this much love and attention. William had proven to be incredibly generous not just with Grace and Hope, but with everyone who had helped during their time in Austin. He had set up college funds for Mrs. Rodriguez's grandchildren, donated equipment to Austin Memorial Hospital's pediatric wing, and provided grants to several nursing students who were struggling financially. "I learned something important during those weeks in your apartment," William told Grace one evening as they sat in his study planning their wedding. "Money means nothing compared to the kindness and love that people showed us. I want to spend the rest of my life paying that forward." Their wedding was planned for Christmas Eve, and William had insisted on a celebration that would include everyone who had become part of their extended family. Mrs. Rodriguez and her entire family were being flown in from Austin, along with the neighbors and friends who had supported them during the crisis. "I want our wedding to be a celebration of family and community," William explained as they reviewed the guest list. "The people who helped us during our time of need deserve to share in our happiness." As Christmas approached, Grace reflected on the incredible journey that had brought them to this point. What had started as a simple act of kindness during a thunderstorm had evolved into something beautiful and lasting. They had gained not just a husband and father for Thomas, but an entire extended family of people who cared about them. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if we hadn't been looking out the window that night?" Hope asked as they decorated the Christmas tree in the main living room, while Thomas played with his toys nearby. "I try not to think about it," Grace replied. "I prefer to focus on how blessed we are that everything happened exactly as it did. Sometimes I think it was all meant to be." William appeared in the doorway, holding a tray of hot chocolate for everyone. "What was meant to be?" "All of this," Grace said, gesturing around the beautifully decorated room where their unconventional family was preparing for the holidays. "The storm, the accident, finding Thomas, falling in love with you. All of it." "I couldn't agree more," William said as he set down the tray and picked up Thomas, who immediately started babbling excitedly. "Some things are just destined to happen, and I think our family is one of them." As they spent the evening decorating and planning for their upcoming weddings, none of them could have predicted that their happiness was about to multiply in ways they had never imagined possible. 6 months after their move to Dallas, the Morrison estate had been transformed from a quiet bachelor's home into a vibrant family compound. Thomas, now over a year old, was walking and chattering constantly as he explored every corner of his expanded world. His personality had blossomed under the attention of his devoted family, and he had become a charming, confident toddler who brought joy to everyone he met. Grace had settled into her role as Thomas's mother and William's wife with natural ease. Their Christmas Eve wedding had been a beautiful celebration attended by over 200 guests, including everyone from Austin who had helped during their time of crisis. Mrs. Rodriguez had cried through the entire ceremony, declaring that it was the most beautiful love story she had ever witnessed. "You look radiant," Hope had whispered to Grace as they prepared for the ceremony. "Motherhood and marriage definitely agree with you." Grace had felt radiant, standing at the altar with William, holding Thomas between them as they exchanged vows. She had experienced a sense of completeness she had never imagined possible. They weren't just two people getting married. They were officially creating the family they had been building since that stormy night in Austin. Hope and Michael's wedding had followed in the spring, held in the estate's beautiful garden, with Thomas serving as an enthusiastic ring bearer. The 1-year-old had toddled down the aisle carrying a pillow with the rings tied securely to it, delighting the guests with his serious concentration on his important task. "I can't believe how much our lives have changed," Hope said to Grace on her wedding day as they watched Thomas play with the other children who had come for the celebration. "A year and a half ago, we were struggling college students. Now we're married women with a beautiful home and the most wonderful little boy in the world." The estate had been modified to accommodate their growing family. William had converted an entire wing into apartments for Hope and Michael, giving them privacy while keeping them close enough to help with Thomas's care. A new playground had been installed in the backyard, complete with swings, slides, and a sandbox that Thomas loved. Grace had continued her nursing studies and was scheduled to graduate in the fall. William had been incredibly supportive of her educational goals, often taking care of Thomas in the evenings so she could study. He had also arranged for her to do her clinical rotations at the Children's Hospital, where Dr. Chen now served as Chief of Pediatrics. "I want you to have your own accomplishments and career," William had told her when she worried about balancing motherhood and school. Thomas benefits from having a mother who is pursuing her own dreams and goals. Hope had decided to specialize in pediatric nursing, inspired by her experience caring for Thomas. She was particularly interested in working with families in crisis situations, having seen firsthand how much difference proper support could make during difficult times. Michael had proven to be excellent at his job as head of family security, but he had also become an important father figure for Thomas. The toddler adored Uncle Michael and often followed him around the estate, chattering in his own language while Michael patiently listened and responded. "Thomas is going to grow up thinking that all children have 4 parents," Grace observed one afternoon as she watched William, Michael, Hope, and herself all simultaneously trying to help Thomas with his lunch. "Is that such a bad thing?" William asked as he wiped applesauce from Thomas's face. "He'll never doubt that he's loved and wanted." The extended family from Austin remained an important part of their lives. Mrs. Rodriguez visited every month, bringing homemade food and spending hours playing with Thomas. Several of their former neighbors had become regular correspondents, sending letters and photos that Grace kept in a special album dedicated to their Austin family. Dr. Chen had become a close friend and served as Thomas's primary pediatrician. She visited the estate monthly for checkups and had become like a grandmother to the little boy. "Thomas is developing beautifully," Dr. Chen reported during his 15-month checkup. "He's ahead of schedule in most areas, particularly language and social development. Having multiple loving caregivers has obviously been wonderful for him." Rebecca had relocated to Dallas and had taken a position managing the household staff at the estate. She had become like an older sister to Grace and Hope, offering advice on everything from child-rearing to marriage. Her experience and wisdom were invaluable as they navigated their new roles. "You're all natural parents," Rebecca told them one evening as they watched Thomas play with his toys in the living room. "I've worked with many wealthy families over the years, and I've never seen a child who is more loved and secure than Thomas." William had continued his generous support of the Austin community that had helped them. He had established a foundation focused on supporting families in crisis, providing emergency assistance, childcare, and educational opportunities. Grace served on the board of directors, bringing her perspective as someone who had benefited from community kindness. "I want to make sure that other families in difficult situations receive the same kind of help we did," William explained as they planned the foundation's programs. "The people of Austin taught us that kindness and generosity create ripple effects that extend far beyond the original act." As summer approached, Grace began to suspect that their family might be growing in another way. She had been feeling tired and slightly nauseous for several weeks, and her period was late. The possibility of being pregnant filled her with both excitement and nervousness. What if Thomas doesn't adjust well to having a sibling? Grace worried to Hope as they watched the toddler play in his sandbox. He's been the center of attention for his entire life. "Thomas has so much love in his life that I think he'll be excited to share it with a brother or sister," Hope replied. "Besides, he's already learned to share attention with all of us." When Grace finally took a pregnancy test and saw the positive result, she felt overwhelmed with joy. She and William had talked about having more children, but they had agreed to wait until Thomas was older and their marriage was more established. But this unexpected blessing felt like another piece of their perfect family falling into place. "We're going to have a baby," Grace told William that evening as they sat in their bedroom after putting Thomas to bed. "I'm pregnant." William's face lit up with joy as he pulled her into his arms. "That's wonderful news. Thomas is going to be such a good big brother." They decided to wait until Grace was further along before sharing the news with Hope and Michael, but it was difficult to contain their excitement. Thomas seemed to sense that something special was happening, becoming even more affectionate and cuddly than usual. "I think he knows," Grace said one morning as Thomas climbed into bed with them and gently patted her still flat stomach. Babies and children often sense these things before adults do. As they planned for their growing family, Grace reflected on the incredible journey that had brought them to this point. Every challenge they had faced had led to something wonderful. Every act of kindness had been returned with interest. Every leap of faith had resulted in unexpected blessings. Do you ever think about what we would tell people if they asked us how to find happiness? Grace asked William one evening as they sat on their porch watching Thomas play in the yard. "I'd tell them to pay attention to opportunities to help others," William replied. "I'd tell them that sometimes the most important moments in life come disguised as inconveniences or emergencies. And I'd tell them that love multiplies when you share it." Neither of them could have predicted that their advice would soon be put to the test in ways that would demonstrate just how strong and resilient their unconventional family had become. 1 year later, the Morrison estate was filled with the sounds of children's laughter as Thomas, now 2.5, chased his 6-month-old sister Emma around the living room. Emma couldn't actually crawl yet, but Thomas was determined to include her in all of his games, carefully carrying her from toy to toy and chattering to her in his own special language. "Brother," Emma would babble happily whenever Thomas appeared in her line of sight, and his face would light up with pride at being recognized and appreciated. Grace watched the interaction between her children with wonder and gratitude. Thomas had adapted to his role as big brother with enthusiasm and gentleness that surprised everyone. From the moment Emma had arrived home from the hospital, he had appointed himself as her protector and entertainer. "Baby sister hungry," Thomas announced solemnly as Emma began to fuss, and he would immediately search for Grace or Hope to provide the necessary assistance. Hope and Michael had welcomed their own son, David, just 3 months after Emma's birth. The estate now housed 3 small children under the age of 3, and the chaos was wonderful and exhausting in equal measure. "We've created our own little preschool," Hope laughed as she watched David attempt to keep up with his older cousins. "These children are going to grow up thinking that all families have multiple parents and endless playmates." William had embraced fatherhood for the second time with even more confidence and joy than the first. He often worked from home so he could help with the children, and he had converted his study into a playroom where the children could stay close while he handled business calls. "Daddy work," Thomas would announce when he saw William on the phone, and he would gather up Emma and David to play quietly until the call was finished. Grace had graduated from nursing school at the top of her class and had taken a position in the pediatric wing of Dallas Children's Hospital. She worked part-time, allowing her to pursue her career while still being present for her family. William had been incredibly supportive of her professional goals, often adjusting his own schedule to accommodate her work commitments. "I want our children to see that both parents have careers and responsibilities outside the home," William had said when Grace worried about working while the children were young. "Emma especially needs to see that women can be mothers and professionals at the same time." Michael had expanded his role at Morrison Technologies, taking on additional responsibilities for corporate security while continuing to oversee the family's personal protection. He had proven to be excellent at balancing his professional duties with his family commitments. "Uncle Michael fix," David would say whenever anything needed repair, and Michael would patiently address everything from broken toys to wobbly high chairs. The extended family from Austin remained an integral part of their lives. Mrs. Rodriguez had moved to Dallas to be closer to the children, and William had purchased a small house near the estate where she lived with her daughter's family. She served as an unofficial grandmother to all 3 children and was always available to help with childcare or cooking. "These babies are my greatest joy," Mrs. Rodriguez would say as she rocked whichever child needed comforting. "God knew what he was doing when he brought all of you together." Dr. Chen had become so attached to the family that she had accepted a position as the children's primary pediatrician, making house calls and ensuring that all 3 children received the best possible medical care. She marveled at how well-adjusted and healthy all of the children were. "I've never seen children who are more secure and confident," Dr. Chen observed during one of her regular visits. "They clearly know they are loved and wanted by multiple people, and it shows in everything they do." Rebecca had become like a grandmother to the children, helping with their care and teaching them Spanish songs and games that she had learned from her own grandmother. She often told them stories about their family's early days in Austin, ensuring that they would grow up knowing how their unique family had been formed. "Once upon a time," Rebecca would begin, "there was a terrible storm, and two brave sisters saved a baby and his nanny from a car accident. And that's how our family began. William had continued to expand his philanthropic efforts, establishing programs that supported families in crisis throughout Texas. The foundation had helped hundreds of families over the past few years, providing everything from emergency childcare to educational scholarships. "We have been blessed beyond measure," William often said during foundation board meetings. "It's our responsibility to share those blessings with others who need help." Grace served as the foundation's Director of Family Services, using her nursing background and personal experience to help design programs that provided practical support during difficult times. She particularly enjoyed working with single parents and families dealing with medical crises. "Every family we help reminds me of our own story," Grace told William as they reviewed grant applications one evening. "People just need someone to believe in them and offer practical support during their hardest moments." As the children grew, they began to understand that their family was different from most others, but they saw that difference as something special rather than unusual. Thomas often told his friends about his two mommies and two daddies, and he seemed proud of having such a large and loving support system. "Why do some families only have one mommy and one daddy?" Thomas asked one day after a playdate with a friend from a traditional nuclear family. "Different families are made in different ways," Grace explained as she helped him with his lunch. "Some children have one mommy and one daddy. Some have just one parent. Some live with grandparents. And some have families like ours with lots of people who love them." The screech of metal against concrete pierced through the thunder as Grace Bennett watched in horror from her apartment window. The black sedan had spun completely around on the rain-slicked Interstate 35 before slamming into the concrete barrier just 50 yards from her building. Steam rose from the crumpled hood, and the driver's side door hung open at an impossible angle. "Hope, call 911 now," Grace shouted to her twin sister as she grabbed her raincoat and bolted toward the door. The two 22-year-old college students had been studying for their nursing finals when the crash happened, but all thoughts of textbooks vanished as Grace sprinted across the muddy field toward the wreckage. The rain hammered down in sheets, making it nearly impossible to see more than a few feet ahead. Grace's sneakers squelched through the grass as she reached the twisted remains of what had once been a luxury car. The acrid smell of burning oil mixed with the fresh scent of rain, creating a nauseating combination that made her stomach lurch. "Hello, can you hear me?" Grace called out as she approached the driver's side. A young woman, probably in her late 20s, sat unconscious behind the steering wheel. Blood trickled from a gash on her forehead, and her breathing was shallow but steady. The woman's dark hair was matted with blood, and her expensive blouse was torn and stained. That's when Grace heard it. A soft crying sound coming from the back seat. She moved around to the passenger side, where the damage was less severe, and peered through the rain-streaked window. A baby carrier sat secured in the back seat, and inside was the most beautiful baby boy she had ever seen. He couldn't have been more than 6 months old, with bright blue eyes and wispy blonde hair. Despite the trauma of the crash, he seemed alert and uninjured, though clearly frightened. "It's okay, little one," Grace whispered through the glass. "We're going to get you out of here." Hope arrived breathless, her own raincoat barely protecting her from the downpour. "The ambulance is on the way, but they said it could be 15 minutes because of the storm. Half the city is flooded and they are backed up with calls." Grace tried the rear passenger door and found it was jammed shut. The impact had bent the frame just enough to trap the door in place. She could see the baby was getting more distressed, his cries growing louder as the rain pounded on the roof above him. "We need to get him out now," Grace said, her voice tight with urgency. "This car could catch fire, and that baby shouldn't stay in there any longer than necessary." Hope examined the other doors and found that the front passenger door could open with some effort. She managed to squeeze inside and carefully began working to unbuckle the car seat. The mechanism had been damaged in the crash, and it took several precious minutes to free the carrier. Meanwhile, Grace focused on the unconscious woman. She checked for a pulse and found it was weak but regular. The woman's breathing seemed to be getting more labored, and Grace noticed her lips were starting to turn slightly blue. She needed medical attention immediately. "I've got the baby," Hope called out as she finally managed to extract the car seat through the front door. She immediately covered the carrier with her raincoat to protect the infant from the storm. "His name is Thomas according to this paper in the diaper bag." Grace made a difficult decision. The paramedics were still minutes away, and every second counted. The woman's condition was deteriorating, and the baby needed to get somewhere warm and dry. Their apartment building was much closer than waiting for the ambulance in this weather. "We're taking them both up to our place," Grace announced. "Help me get her out of the car." It took both sisters working together to carefully extract the unconscious woman from the driver's seat. She was deadweight, and they had to be extremely careful not to worsen any potential injuries. Grace supported her head and neck while Hope took her legs, and they slowly carried her across the field toward their building. The baby, Thomas, had stopped crying once he was out of the car, as if he somehow understood that these strangers were trying to help him. Hope kept one hand on the carrier to keep it steady as they made their way through the mud and rain. By the time they reached their small apartment, all four of them were soaked through. Grace immediately called 911 again to update their location, while Hope found towels and blankets. They laid the woman, who they later learned was named Rebecca Walsh, on their couch and covered her with dry blankets. Thomas seemed remarkably calm for a baby who had just been in a serious car accident. Hope carefully lifted him from his carrier and was relieved to find no obvious signs of injury. He looked up at her with those bright blue eyes and made a small cooing sound that melted her heart instantly. "You're such a brave little guy," Hope whispered as she wrapped him in a soft towel. "Everything's going to be okay now." Grace monitored Rebecca's vital signs as best she could with her nursing school training. The woman's breathing had stabilized somewhat, but she remained unconscious. There was still blood seeping from the head wound, and Grace applied gentle pressure with a clean cloth to help slow the bleeding. When the paramedics finally arrived 20 minutes later, they were amazed to find their patients in such good condition. The lead paramedic, a kind-faced man named Steve Rodriguez, praised the sisters for their quick thinking and proper first aid. "I like our way," Thomas declared with the confidence of a 2-year-old. "More people means more hugs." Hope and Michael had announced that they were expecting their second child, due in the spring. The prospect of a fourth child in the household was both exciting and daunting, but everyone was looking forward to expanding their family even further. "We're going to need a bigger playground," William joked as they watched the 3 children playing together in the backyard. "And probably a bigger dining room table." As Christmas approached, Grace reflected on the incredible journey that had brought them to this point. 5 years had passed since that stormy night in Austin, when she and Hope had rescued a baby from a car accident. That simple act of kindness had led to a life filled with more love, joy, and purpose than she had ever imagined possible. "Do you ever miss our old life?" Hope asked one evening as they gave baths to their respective children. "The simplicity of just worrying about ourselves and our own problems." "Never," Grace replied without hesitation as she helped Emma splash in her bath. "This life is more complicated and more demanding, but it's also infinitely more rewarding. I can't imagine any other way of living." William appeared in the doorway holding David, who had escaped from Michael's attempts to get him dressed for bed. "Family meeting in the living room," he announced with mock seriousness. "We need to discuss Christmas presents, and who's been naughty versus nice this year." As they gathered in the living room with all 3 children, Grace looked around at the faces of the people who had become her whole world. Thomas was snuggled against William's side, Emma was contentedly nursing, and David was playing with his favorite toy, while Hope and Michael looked on with obvious contentment. "I have an announcement," William said as they settled down for their family meeting. "I've been thinking about our Christmas traditions, and I want to establish something new this year." "What kind of tradition?" Hope asked as she helped David climb into her lap. "I want to start a tradition where we tell the story of how our family began every Christmas Eve," William explained. "I want our children to grow up knowing that love and kindness can create miracles, and that families can be formed in the most unexpected ways." "I love that idea," Grace said, imagining Thomas and Emma and David growing up hearing the story of the storm and the accident and the sisters who chose to help a stranger's baby. "Once upon a time," William began, looking at each of the children in turn, "there was a terrible storm in Austin, Texas. And 2 brave sisters looked out their window and saw people who needed help." As William told the story of their family's beginning, Grace felt overwhelmed with gratitude for every twist and turn that had brought them to this moment. Their love had multiplied beyond anything she could have predicted, creating a family that was unconventional but perfect in every way that mattered. Thomas listened to the story with rapt attention, even though he had heard it many times before. Emma goggled happily in Grace's arms, and David played quietly while absorbing the familiar rhythm of the beloved family tale. And they all lived happily ever after, William concluded, because when people choose kindness and love, miracles happen. "Tell it again, Daddy," Thomas requested, as he always did when the story ended. "Tomorrow night," William promised. "We'll tell it again tomorrow night, and every Christmas Eve for as long as our family is together." Grace smiled as she looked around at their living room filled with toys and laughter and the sound of children's voices. This was exactly the kind of happily ever after she had dreamed of as a child, but it was better than any fairy tale because it was real and it was theirs. Love had indeed multiplied, creating a family that was stronger and more beautiful than the sum of its parts. And as they prepared for another Christmas together, Grace knew that their story was just beginning.